Welcome to this day 2 of the first virtual conference, annual conference of the Working with Perpetrators European Network. So those of you that were here yesterday will know this. I'm Nate Eisenstadt, and I'm delighted to be your moderator for the conference. We had a great day yesterday and have a lot more lined up in today's program, where we'll once again be joined by some of the leading thinkers and practitioners in the field, coming from a broad range of countries and approaches. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but we had a great day. Yesterday we heard from keynotes from Jana Špero on work with offenders of gender-based violence in the Croatian criminal justice system, and from Sandra Jovanovic on prison and probation-based programs across Europe. And our panel discussion focused primarily on perpetrator work in the context of probation in the Republic of Ireland, in the UK, and in Spain. And while approaches really varied across these sites and settings, we heard common themes around the necessity of high-level buy-in or high-level agreements for work across statutory and voluntary sectors, especially around the areas of information sharing, about the utility of shared risk assessment tools where possible and shared assessment processes, and around really strategic coordination to enable whole system approaches to really hang together and not create either duplication or confusion. We heard about the importance of building trust between agencies and between agencies and service users, particularly with this particular service user group or offender group in this case, and that this trust takes time and is challenged by different institutional or organizational languages and cultures, as well as differing core priorities, responsibilities, and lines of accountability. We had some fantastic questions yesterday, and I hope we can continue that liveliness today, both to the keynote speakers and to the panel. And the discussions that ensued circled around 3 core areas, really, that I'm sure will remain as relevant today as we focus more on prisons. So firstly, there were questions around the evidence of impact, especially on recidivism, where it was noted that there is more work to be done. Secondly, numerous questions addressed the possibility and the practicalities of bringing together gender transformative and therapeutic or psychosocial approaches. And panelists provided some great examples of the ways these sometimes opposing methods or approaches have really been integrated in practice. Thirdly, there were a few questions around how and to what extent victim voices or victim safety, victim survivor coordination can really be integrated into perpetrator work in the probation and prison setting, especially given that the core responsibility of the statutory agency tends to reside with the offender. Again, this is another question that I'm sure will remain as relevant today. So I'm now going to hand over to Alessandra Pauncz, Executive Director of WWP EN, for some welcoming words.
Hello, welcome WWP, and thank you, Nate, for great moderation. We're really excited about being here together again, being together here virtually with all the challenges and opportunities that this has allowed. And let's start with the opportunities, since we all know about the challenges. We usually have about 100 attendees at our annual conference, and this year we had over 300 people signing up for the annual conference. And this means that we have had the possibility to reach out, and we've had not only our members' attendance and the possibility of more members for each organization to participate, but also an international attendance. We have had attendance from the US, from New Zealand, from Australia, from different parts of Africa, from India. And we think that this has really been very exciting to be able to reach out to so many different countries and participants. The conferences and the keynotes and the workshops have been really interesting so far. They have delineated how we are really facing when we're discussing working with probation, prison, and perpetrator programs, very complex programs, very complex issues, and how cooperation is necessary, but also presents challenges and is complex. I was very impressed by the high level of expertise that different participants were bringing from very different sectors of the work with perpetrators. And in our workshop on the Caledonian system, we were discussing how basically the intersection of men's programs, women and children's services, and attention to the multi-agency collaboration, and also the service-generated risks need to be at the center of our attention. And I think that this is really sort of the focus of reflecting on our next steps forward. How do we address these complexities, and how do we move forward on this? Before we sort of start the next phase of our conference, and I wanted to wish a very, very happy birthday today to our president that is having a happy birthday. I will not attempt the happy birthday, Mr. President. That would be absolutely no competition. But we really want to thank him for all the support that he's giving us throughout this very difficult phase. The two last things before we pass on to the keynote, I would like to introduce our speaker for the next keynote. But before we actually start the keynote, there is going to be a very, very short video that we're going to be showing throughout the second day of the conference, and that has to do also with our commitment to trying to respond to the complexities of working with perpetrators, and how we are able to also keep children safe with our intervention in perpetrator programs. So WWP is developing some really exciting opportunities for some of our members that would be interested in developing child protection policies and the application of this. And this video is just sort of a little teaser to encourage members to reach out to us and start building together a collaboration on this. And we'll be showing this video again, but I just wanted to give you a drop of context on this. So our next speaker is going to be Darren O'Connell. The title of the intervention is the Multi-Agency Cooperation for Effective Change in Imprisoned Perpetrators of Domestic Violence. Darren O'Connell is manager of the DRIVE project in South Wales. He has worked in the criminal justice sector for most of his life, and he began his career working with perpetrators as a prison officer. As a criminal justice officer with HAFL, a national charity, Darren worked across probation areas, promoting links between criminal justice agencies, mental health service, and health and social care services, and is committed to working on finding ways of enhancing these collaboration. He has supported probation officers by giving them competence to challenge when service users' needs were not met. Darren strongly believes that people can change with access to the right support. So just after this brief video that I anticipated, I will leave the floor to Darren O'Connell. And thank you very much for being with us today. Goodbye.
My name is Darren O'Connell. I'm a project manager for the Drive project. I'm absolutely delighted and excited to be asked to speak here today. Unfortunately, due to circumstances out of our control, it has to be virtual. Working within the criminal justice sector is something I've been very passionate about for many years. I'm lucky enough to work in Safe and Murder Tydfil, who is the service provider for the Drive project. Domestic abuse is unfortunately very prevalent here in South Wales, United Kingdom. It is because of the vision, drive and determination of the Right Honourable Alan Michael, Police and Crime Commissioner for South Wales, and the commitment of his team that I'm here today to share with you our work in South Wales. Promoting systems change, enhancing partnership working to address perpetrator behaviour, moving away from the question, why doesn't she leave? And asking the question, why doesn't he stop? Drive is an intervention developed by Respect, Safe Lives and Social Finance that works with high risk and high harm perpetrators of domestic abuse and incorporates intensive one-to-one case management and an opportunity for our service users to obtain sustainable, attitudinal and behavioural change should they wish to. Alongside this is a coordinated police-led multi-agency response that disrupts opportunities for abuse to be carried out and reduces risk to our victims should the service user refuse to take up the offer to change. Some of our best outcomes have come out of our working very proactively with prisons and prison staff. We work with perpetrators with congruence, empathy, honesty and perseverance. Often, a perpetrator of abuse has attempted to solve their problems in a myriad of ways, which has proved unsuccessful. To gain their trust and to build rapport, we need to be showing them that we have a genuine investment in them. Some of the people we see coming through our service are very little in the way of an appropriate role model. We are working with service users that have committed high levels of emotional, psychological and physical violence on their partners, ex-partners and family members. Although we are not expected to ignore these actions, there is a need to be able to demonstrate a level of unconditional positive regard to these individuals. This, in simplistic terms, encapsulates the concept that although they may have done bad things, they also hold positive attributes and are inherently worth supporting. We must listen carefully as to understand the service user's unique situation and to let them know that we do hear them. For some of our service users, those they deem as the establishment have only put them in jail or removed their children. So naturally, there will be a lot of distrust and suspicion in the early exchanges. By using our interpersonal skills, we communicate that we value their worth as a human being, no matter what, and their sentence or history does not define them. This open honesty, acceptance for them as a person, and continuity of support will help eradicate the barriers that were once there, allowing us to assertively challenge their belief systems without fear of disengagement or reprisals to the victim or victims of their abuse. We work pro-socially with our service users with the expressed attempt to get the service user to mirror our values. We do this in every meeting, whether a support session or a behaviour change session. This is something we have become very skilled at, and over time, you will see this happening, this mirroring of values. Even with those with the more misogynistically entrenched attitudes, they will eventually start to do that. All our staff are chosen after an interview process where we will try to look not just for competencies, for values. We need our case managers to have a rehabilitation ethos, be non-judgmental, who avoids assumptions, who has that professional curiosity and recognises their role in facilitating change. So now I'm going to talk about the prison work that Drive does. We have a very good working relationship with all the prisons in Wales, from the security teams to the personnel officers on the wings, to the mental health services inside the prison, and to the prison offender managers. Historically, a third sector organisation was not deemed as important as a statutory agency, and the information shared deemed not as reliable. In the early days of Drive, we were viewed as just another charity supporting offenders. We have seen this in the 3 main Welsh prisons. When it comes to multi-agency work, sometimes we have to take the lead in trying to negotiate on behalf of the service user. We use individual advocacy on a regular basis. We see often that problems arise due to a lack of knowledge of the needs of the service user, rather than any ill will on the part of the institution or the individual prison officer or offender manager. By keeping this perspective and working in partnership with the institution or the person involved, we will increase the likelihood of us having a positive outcome. Negotiation is a process which is intended to produce an agreement. Negotiation commonly takes the form of a discussion and may be used in situations where there is some sort of disagreement or the potential of conflict. Negotiation is not uncommon between different professionals, such as prison officers, offender managers, and others who work with prisoners, as the agencies they represent are likely to have different aims, objectives, targets, and working practices. Individual advocacy is the process of assisting a person to achieve a desired outcome, and this is what we all want to achieve. Sometimes the presentation of the service user will allow the prison officer or offender manager or any other staff member to form an immediate opinion on them. There's a phrase I use to our service users, which I will say, you don't get a second chance to make a first impression. Often, we will see a prison officer be over-punitive to a service user as a result of their first encounter. In order to try and mitigate this, we try and get the officer to see them as a person, not just as an offence. We do this by involving them in all aspects of our work, from sharing the service user needs assessment we have worked on, to discussing their timeline, where we have spoken to the service user at length about his family and about relationship history, as well as highlighting the information we have gleaned from other agencies. With this evidence and this structured professional judgment, we usually see a change in attitude from the prison staff and a partial understanding of the issues faced by the service user. We also make sure we have regular contact with the offender manager or prison officer. We do case reviews, expeditious information sharing, and progress reporting. To help break down barriers, we will inform them that the statutory agency is always the responsible authority, and we will in no way try to undermine, duplicate any work, or take over. What we will do is try and alleviate some pressure from them by adding value to their work with the service user. We have also proven that we can develop rapport and strong relationships with some of the most resistant service users with a long history of poor engagement. Service users can have an inherent distrust of probation and statutory services, and our status as a third sector organisation can often bypass this mistrust and promote more open and honest engagement, particularly where they have experienced the benefits of the support that we offer. We find on a regular basis that this again really breaks down barriers. As a previous prison officer myself, I can evidence most of the staff that my prison recruited were ex-army personnel. They wanted to instill some discipline into the prisoners. While an enforced regime is understandable and sometimes needed, they sometimes did not have the required empathy or understanding to deal with the trauma that they were witnessing on a daily basis. Attempted suicides and significant self-harm were an everyday occurrence, and this would be deemed as attention-seeking by many of the said staff. I quickly began to realise that working with prisoners to try and see what is behind their presentation was a lot better than having to put on protective equipment to clean the feces of their observation window after they've done a dirty protest. Of course, having the time and resources to work one-to-one is not always possible due to the number of prisoners being on the rise year upon year. However, I truly believe that if we invest some time in some prisoners, we will hopefully stem the tide of the recurring prison sentences we see. Some staff will have a very punitive view on prisoners and resent any notion that they are able to change. They see us as colluding with them or trying to excuse their behaviour. We do see this very often in all the different prisons in Wales. To counteract this, we make ourselves available for case reviews, risk strategy meetings, and resettlement focus planning meetings. We send the relevant staff in-depth progress reports that can be lifted out and put into their case management system, thereby saving them work. We also found that us demonstrating that we hold perpetrators to account for their behaviour, the initiating of disruption techniques and strategies, and the sharing of information pertaining to risk also aids us in cementing that firm relationship that we need. Sharing information on progress made with the service user also helps the prison officer, offender manager, or anyone else working with the prisoner gain some insight into their stages of change. Regular presentations to the staff where possible made them also feel included. This is difficult in a secure state, but we were happy to go into the prison wherever we could. Whenever the offender managers at the team meeting, we were always able to answer their questions and allay their concerns. Sometimes explaining to the staff that without a coordinated multi-agency response, this behaviour is very likely to continue, and therefore they will potentially continue to see the same service user come back and forth to the prison on a regular basis. Once we tell them this usually works. Our work with the service user, whilst he's inside prison, is part of the treatment formulation we will have devised for them. Our ultimate aim is to support them to change whilst looking to disrupt their previous behaviour, also keeping victims and associated children and young people safe and helping prevent future victims. We also see that the service user has significant issues prior to coming into prison. This could involve their basic physiological needs, such as food and shelter. By assisting them in these needs, not only are we building up a rapport, but we're also laying the foundation for sustainable change. Some of the people we deal with will never be able to adhere to behaviour change programmes when they have to have no access to finances, housing, substance misuse help, or mental health provision. Therefore, they will always be in prison. We will strive to work inside the prison and then outside to make that seamless transition, as seamless as possible, the transition from prison into the community. That is our goal. Our intervention at the prison stage also helps us inform the victim safety plan, as we will be having timely information on what the service user's plans are when he's released. So I'm going to give you an example of the work we do. So we have a service user who is a repeat domestic abuse aggressor towards his mother and has been identified as being a previous violent relationship with an ex-partner. There are non-contact orders in place preventing him from contacting his ex-partner and a restraining order in place preventing him from attending his mother's address. This case came to drive following repeated breaches of the restraining order. The order has been breached repeatedly and he was always in and out of custody. When in custody, he was a prolific self-harmer and was a drain on the resources due to him having almost constant observation due to his risk. He would be deemed what is called a revolving door, coming in and out of the prison with such a regularity that he even had his own cell. So in our work with him, what we found was in the community, he had been assessed by mental health crisis team following presenting to them with paranoid thoughts and feelings and signs of neglect. He was identified as a frequent attender to accident and emergency, and had been treated frequently as a result of substance misuse. He had never been open to mental health services and had no formal diagnosis. So when we started working with him, although initially he would be very cautious, suspicious, he was more suspicious and cautious and hostile to prison staff and other prisoners. After 4 to 5 appointments with Drive, he started to engage well with his case manager. These appointments were conducted at the prison itself in the legal visit department. After he recognised the case manager's continuity, he began to open up and divulge things he wouldn't have to the prison staff. As these appointments continued, he reported that he believed that there are numerous professionals involved in a conspiracy to cause him harm, and that prison staff were allowing some inmates to leave the prison at night, and they were sneaking them back in the morning. The claims made by the service user increased as contact continued. He then claimed that his mother was killed in a conspiracy at the local homeless agency, and that her death was covered up by staff, residents, prison officers, and the government. He claimed that his mother was replaced by a lookalike who was stealing large sums of money from him, given to him by his father. He told us that he was being held against his will by the prison staff, who would poison his food and pretend to want to help him. We spoke to his personal officer, and he said that in his estimation, our service user was bad, he was not mad, and he was a nuisance and a drain on resources. So what we did, we linked in with the prison offender manager and reported to them that there was a significant risk to his mother. The offender manager explained to us that the service user would not even speak to him, and that he found it very difficult to formulate any post-sentence plan. Reports from the prison wing was that our service user would continue to be a significant management problem. We contacted the mental health services in HMP Cardiff and explained our concern that our service user is delusional and he poses a significant risk to his mother. We were told that a previous assessment had been made and they found him to be very monosyllabic and would not engage in the assessment. Therefore, they found nothing significant. The case manager explained to the mental health supervisor that we were of the belief that the whole prison system, he was of the belief that the whole prison system was part of an elusive plot against him. The case manager then worked with the offender manager in the prison, shared this vital information, and together they called a strategic meeting to highlight this risk. We highlighted very early on that he was a significant risk to his mother in prison visits. His cell was searched before a visit, and as a result, a sharpened stick was found. His visits were then held behind perspex glass as a precaution to his mother. After the psychological evaluation led by the prison, it was quickly discovered that this service user was indeed very mentally unwell, and not only was he a significant risk to his mother, but to prison officers, prisoners, and other support staff. He was subsequently sent to a medium secure hospital on a section 3741 of the Mental Health Act. He is now being medicated appropriately. He has a care coordinator and is now in the appropriate surroundings where he will be monitored and have access to psychiatric services. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind the fact that the service user had detached himself from the fact that his mother was actually his mother. This would have led to her untimely death at his hands. He is not in prison anymore, so he's not a drain on resources. He is getting the help that he needs. So this is just one example of our work with the service users inside prison. We have many more and have a very good record of achieving long-lasting, sustainable, attitudinal and behavioural change with this cohort within the prison setting. We were lucky enough to be evaluated by the University of Bristol under Dr. Nathan Eisenstadt and overseen by Professor Marianne Hester, and the report is available for your perusal online. In closing, I would just like to thank everybody from the WWP, EN, and everybody involved in giving me the honour and the opportunity to be able to speak to you all today. Together, we will achieve system change, and hopefully we can continue to do this even after Brexit. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Darren. Really comprehensive view of the Drive project there, and really heartwarming to hear about your kind of unconditional positive regard both towards service users and, in a sense, to those you're collaborating with. We've got quite a few questions have come through. I wonder if, Simon, if you could bring Darren onto screen, and I'll... Thank you. Okay. Hi, Darren.
Hello.
So we have a question from Clarissa asking, how did you tackle situations when the prison officers themselves subscribe to abusive beliefs around their own intimate relationships, or held the view that domestic crimes were soft and that women were to blame?
They wouldn't say directly to us that anything about, you know, their relationships or how they found women, but we did see quite a lot of collusion. We did see a lot of collusion with some prison officers with our cohort. Things like when we would report that there's been a breach, so there's a live restraining order, and so we had evidence from the IDVA, from the victim support services, that he was contacting her from prison while there was still a restraining order. So we would link into the security team, and on occasion we were met with, well, she's an adult, tell her to put the phone down. So there was a lot of institutional advocacy that we were doing then from the victim side of things. So actually the onus is not on her, the onus is on him. I say him because we work with 97% of the guys we work with are male. So again, it's holding him to account for his behavior. So we would link in with the said officer, and we would try to get that disrupted. So there's an example I can give where we knew that from the victim, again, from the victim's voice, from the support services, that what he was doing was he had down on his telephone list his mother, but what he would do, he would subjugate the victim to be in that house at the same time that he was going to phone his mother. So to all intents and purposes, he was actually phoning his mum. Well, he wasn't. He was phoning the victim, and the victim would be forced to speak to him. We had that information. That information then was sent to the teams. They recorded the phone calls, and we had a great result on that because he had additional charges in relation to perverting the course of justice and intimidating of a witness. So ironically, he had more of a sentence than he would have had for the first assault. So in the answer to that question, we don't see it directly. It has happened on occasion, and we like to think that we would give them what we term a 10-minute attitude adjustment course to kind of let them know that actually the onus is on the perpetrator.
Okay, great, thank you. So don't have a lot of time, but we've got a question, and maybe you could just touch on this. What do the behavior change sessions involve? Is it a structured intervention program? And do all the cases get behavior change sessions?
So what we will do at the outset, we will link in with our psychologist colleagues from the prison service and from probation, and we will formulate a plan. So in this formulation, we will do the five. It's called the 5 Ps. So we will look at the problem behavior, the predisposing stuff, so the historical elements that contribute to the current problem, the precipitating sort of triggers, what's happening there, the perpetuating stuff, so that's in the internal and external factors that maintain the problem, and the protective factors. Once we've done that, we can kind of establish what we are going to do in relation to behavior change work. This is all tailored, so the behavior change is actually tailored to his abusive behavior, which again is really beneficial. But every single interaction we have with our guys, so it could be a housing or a finance support session, they will see us using pro-social modeling. So every single session, we will be showing them through verbal and non-verbal cues how they should be behaving. What we do find is when we do the structured, the tailored response to their individual profile, it does encapsulate them and captures them more. What we see on a regular basis is our guys, and bearing in mind our guys they're in total pre-contemplation of what they're doing. So they some of them enjoy what they're doing, some of them don't realize what they're doing, and that's not making any excuses for them. But what we do see is that loads of chaos. So they come to us with chaotic presentation, and we have got to deal with what's in front of us. If you look at Maslow's hierarchy of need, we're asking them to come in here, where we should be looking at the physiological stuff. They are not going to be able to do significant behavior change sessions if they haven't got any to live or their finances. So what we see is they've got very little empathy for the victim, but they always have empathy for the children or associated young person. So we will work on that. So we will try to kind of manage and evolve our behavior change sessions around that specific behavior. We've got 12 months to work with these guys. Continuity is a massive thing for us. So that's the added value that we can bring to probation, is that added value. So we do have, so we're all trained in the respect accredited high harm perpetrator work, but there's a myriad of things that we can use and exercises that we can use, and that is targeted at their specific behavior, and that really works.
Thank you. Okay, you've actually addressed some of the other questions. We had a question around the difference between support and behavior change. We had a question on the kind of systems change via police-led multi-agency approach. And you've talked about how kind of integrated the work you do is. How did you get there? Were government or NGO agencies involved to get to that point?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we wouldn't be where we are without our colleagues, without that multidisciplinary kind of work. We work hand in glove with our partners in the police, in South Wales Police, and in the probation service, because to be able to kind of execute arrests and get that expeditious information sharing, we need them outlets. So the victim's voice is absolutely intrinsic into everything we do. So a typical occurrence could be that the victim will tell us that there's been a breach of a restraining order. So we've got evidence of that. We will link in with the police, and it's that kind of immediacy, that risk level we can see is escalating. We will work with our police colleagues. They will pick him up. They will lift him and get him processed. Very similarly with our probation colleagues as well. So if we've got intelligence that he has been in a crack den, and we know that part of his license conditions are that he has regular testing, what we can do is give that expeditious information, share it expeditiously. He can be brought in, he can be drug tested, and then if needs be, he can be sent back to prison, and then we can reset and start again. A lot of our work, a lot of our really good sustainable change starts when we kind of go through them gates to the prison. And what we try to aspire to do is get that seamless transition from prison into the community. We do that in a myriad of ways. We do that by, if there's any mental health issues and we can get a diagnosis and the treatment starts, what we will do, we will work with a pharmacist to try and get a couple of more extra days of medication. So when he comes out, we can set him up with a doctor's appointment. What we really want is that seamless transition, because what we see, mental health, substance misuse and domestic abuse, as we all know, are called the toxic trio, and that is incredibly dangerous when you're talking domestic abuse. So if we can try and get some sort of therapeutic intervention inside and bring that outside, then we stop in the self-medicating.
Great, thank you. We've got more questions coming through. So maybe the best thing to do would be, Darren, if you're able to have a look on the public chat. We're going to need to bring it to a close now. We're going to take a short break and come back for the panel discussion at 10:30. Darren O'Connell, Drive Project Manager in South Wales, thank you very much.
Thank you for the opportunity, Nate.
Hello, welcome back, everyone. Welcome to the second panel discussion of the conference, this one on perpetrator work in the prison context. We're very fortunate to be joined today by four excellent panelists. Laura Opris from the Oradea Penitentiary, Romania, Paolo Giulini and Isotta Rossoni from the Center for the Promotion of Mediation in Italy, and Davide Parma from Relive Italy. So the way that it'll work is I'm going to pose some questions to the panelists, which the panelists will respond to in turn. There will then be a discussion between the panelists, so a chance for them to respond to the things that one another have said. And then we will move into a question and answer session. So just as we did during Darren's keynote, please ask questions, make comments throughout the contributions. We'll be collecting them as we go, and I will pose them to the panel in the question and answer session. So we'll start with Laura.
I am delighted to speak to all of you about the impact of working with male perpetrators that are incarcerated in maximum security prison in Romania, Oradea, exactly. Experience that is filtered through the lens of a woman psychologist in a strongly masculinized environment. My intervention for today could be seen as a testimonial, because I will reveal my personal experiences that I have faced since I work in prison system for 13 years and a half. But also I will try to pass over my inner reflections and insights, and to advance to the analysis of the factors that can interfere in the process of working with inmates in general and sexual perpetrators in specific. Working with high-risk offenders in a prison was a challenge itself, but at the beginning of my career, I never thought about the additional challenge that will come along. And I refer to the barriers that I have to face as well in the work with the offenders, but also at the institutional level. Gender issues for a female psychologist are grounded in the fact that they work almost exclusively with male offenders. Yet, female officers working with them are formally in a position of power in relation to male offenders, and this centralizes the issue of gender in the supervisory relationship. Due to my experience, I can describe several phases through which I've been through. In my career, I was exposed to many experiences, and I felt being, I don't know, frightened sometimes, manipulated, tried to be controlled by the offenders. But finally, I stopped to reflect upon these inner feelings and on the impact they had on my personal life, and use this insight to develop myself as a practitioner. Working with men in programs in prison had made me hyper aware about issues of power, control, abusiveness, and I can say that I'm more aware of them, whether it's about life in general, relationships at workplace, or in my life in specifically. Sometimes I was asking myself if my emotion could be validated by someone. Then happily, I found some studies and some articles about vicarious or secondary trauma, a concept that describes the negative impact on professionals' emotions resulting from painful experiences in their practice. And I found myself there in this concept. There was a study made on practitioners involved in UK probation programs for domestic violence perpetrators that brought into light this concept and the emotional consequences that the practitioners face due to their work with perpetrators. And I can relate very well my inner emotions, as I told you before. I felt myself provoked to my notions of self-esteem, my safety, my autonomy as a professional, and sometimes I was experiencing even flashbacks, or I was most of the time preoccupied by painful stories that I've heard from inmates. And from the fact that I was talking to another specialists that were and are psychologists in the prison system, they told me that they face the same situations and the same emotions, and I was trying to find a way to cope with all the emotional burden. After all, I want to express to all of you one of my personal experiences, one of the first experiences with a sexual perpetrator at the beginning, in the first months of my experience in prison. It was a man that was accused by raping his 9 years old daughter, that had a suicidal attempt a few days before going to trial, and was brought in front of me, and I was in a sort of conflict and not knowing what to prioritize, to deal with imminent risk of suicide, or not to give anything on it, because I was feeling repulsion and rage and anger against him. Suddenly the security agent that was present there, because it's a rule in prison, in our prison, a maximum security prison, that a security agent to be present there, had a sudden reaction and said, "Stop, lady, this is over. You can change anything here. The man should go to his room. He will do the same. He cannot change. Leave him alone." It was a reaction that ended that so-called counseling. But that was the moment in which I've was aware about my limits, about the fact that I wasn't prepared to face this situation, and that was the starting point for me to look for a supervisor and to look to specialize myself in dealing with sexual offenders, because these are a special category which can bring into therapy with a lot of heavy content, emotional content.
Thank you, Laura. Your contribution really underlines the complexity and personal impact of doing this work. And yeah, just like to thank you for your honesty and openness. There's some really positive comments coming through the chat channel.
Thank you so much.
I'd like to bring in Paolo now. So the question that we're asking is, what is different from general prison work when we're working with perpetrators of sexualized violence or domestic violence? And I'll ask contributors to keep your contribution around 2.5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Nathan. Thank you very much. I'm very happy to be here and to take part of this conference and this panel discussion. Very briefly, my English is so weak that I prefer Miss Isotta Rossoni, my colleague, to answer to the guiding questions. But briefly, I want just to say that I am the president. I'm clinical criminologist and president of NGO, Italian Center of Promotion of Mediation, which was a pioneer in introducing treatment programs for perpetrator of violence in the Milan area in the early 2000s in a clinical criminological integrated approach. And we will answer about the guiding question from this point and this context of work in prison and in the community. So please, Isotta, your English is really better, and I'm glad to answer eventually to the question of the audience.
Okay, do we have Isotta?
Yes. Okay. Hi everyone. Thanks a lot for having us. I'm project coordinator for CPM, and at the moment I'm managing a project focusing on the treatment of sex offenders in various prisons in Italy. But I'm also obviously going to act a bit as spokesperson for all my colleagues who've worked in prison for a very long time now. So just to answer your question, one key point that we've reflected on when trying to answer these guiding questions is that working with perpetrators of gender-based violence, and particularly perpetrators of sexualized violence, poses many challenges because they are part of a highly stigmatized fringe of the prison population. And this is very much a result of that prison subculture that views perpetrators of gender-based violence, and particularly perpetrators of sexualized violence, as more worthy of contempt or more despicable than other prisoners. And obviously, this subculture is perpetuated by inmates themselves through what psychologist Bandura would call that advantageous comparison. So the idea of that selective moral disengagement, whereby an inmate who, for instance, is convicted of murder or gang violence or other crimes, compares himself with a sex offender, for instance, and views himself as less guilty. But it's also brought forward by correctional officers themselves in what is, after all, a very masculine and difficult macho environment, as was mentioned by Laura earlier. So what is very specific in work with these kind of perpetrators is to keep in mind this context and this social isolation that is very much experienced by inmates. And at the same time, because this isolation also crystallizes what are their defense mechanisms, that can be mechanisms of denial and minimization. So to keep this context in mind and also refrain from reenacting what can be ostracizing attitudes that they already experience in the day-to-day in prison. And if I may, I also wanted to add a point on gender, clearly being such a relevant aspect of work with these kind of perpetrators. And I think Laura's kind of explored it in very much detail with her rich testimony. But it can be incredibly challenging for professionals, and particularly female professionals, working with this particular target group because of the nitty-gritty of all of the gendered attitudes and behaviors that underlie their crimes.
Fantastic. Thank you, Isotta. Davide, could you respond to, so what is different from general prison work when we're doing work with perpetrators of sexualized violence and domestic violence?
Good morning, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank you for having me here today. And also, I would like to point out that today my contribution will be giving after a chat I had with a fellow colleague of mine, Mario De Maglie from CAM Florence, the association CAM in Florence. So today I'll try to answer these questions based on both our experiences mine here in Genoa and his experience in prison in Florence. About our question, I would say that Laura and Isotta answered perfectly on the topic. There is absolutely, when we work in prison, the problem of the hierarchy of inmates. So depending on what you did on the problem, why you were in prison, you're in a different hierarchy with inmates. So working with sex offenders is quite difficult, because these inmates are seen at the bottom of this hierarchy, and also tend to be quite in denial of what they've done. Most of them, not all of them, of course. So working with them is quite challenging, and obviously, as Laura pointed out, working with these kind of inmates as a woman is also more challenging. We tend to work in my association, both men and women together. We work usually in groups, and we tend to work together, so that some dynamics tend to manifest themselves working with both a male and a female conductor of groups. And but it's as everybody said, it's very challenging working in this context, both because of the inmate context and both because of the prison context itself. And there are several problems, but I think we will talk about it later. I don't want to take over the other time, so I'll just stop and leave other people to comment.
Thank you, Davide. Yeah, I think the stuff on challenges will probably come in the next question I'm going to ask. So I'll come back to Laura. So I'd like to ask you, we're here to think about collaborations. What has worked well in your collaborations, and what have been some of the challenges? How have you worked through them, both or either personally or organizationally?
Yes, a lot of challenges in my work during these years. As my colleagues observed, I thank them for the warm feedbacks. And one of the challenges that I want to speak upon is that, from my perspectives, dealing with the sexual offenders, being the only woman in the room when we have group therapy, felt that many times the specialist role was slightly put at corner. This was a challenge for my image in front of them, and suddenly came in front the role of a woman in a group of men, asking them delicate questions, uncomfortable questions, putting them to remind about their patterns of relations with women, to speak about situations in which they lost control of their emotions. So these are challenges that we and I face all the time in therapy, especially with sex offenders. Admitting their vulnerabilities is a hard task, first in front of other inmates that are in the same session, then in front of me, because they perceive me first as a woman, and thirdly, to be heard by the security agent that willingly or not is present there. Surprisingly, there were situations in which the security agent started to reveal himself about personal experiences in his life. There were moments in which I talked after the session with that agent, and I told him that, okay, was nice of him to talk about this and to be that sincere, but he can go to the psychologist for the stuff, because it was obvious that wasn't the place in the group of inmates to reveal himself about his own issues. facing this situation can break and spoil all the psychological framing that you have inside with the prisoners. These are challenges that forced me and my colleagues to deal with all types of situations that can appear. Another challenge that forced me to find creative solutions is to convince inmates that they have to participate in these programs, but because they are heavily denying their offenses. So when I have to select participants for group therapy, it's starting a really difficult process. They either they motivate, they don't want to participate without giving reasons, or they refuse after a few sessions, saying that this is not what I've expected for. So dropout is also an indicator of the stage of the motivation of the inmate. I've learned about myself and my work to set boundaries, to set limits, clear limits, and to impose myself not as a woman, but as a professional in front of them. And I understand their need to put in front this role of woman that I am, that I have, because they are kind of much familiar to treat me as they treated the women in their lives. But I tell them that, okay, I'm here as a psychologist. I can tell you my opinion at a professional level, and it's better to stick upon this, because we can go on a wrong track if I'm expressing my opinion as a woman. So these are challenges, daily challenges, from which started to frame my therapeutical approach. This is, and there are many more, but this is the most important that I find it now.
Fantastic, thank you, Laura. Okay, so Paolo, would you like to come in on this question of what's worked well in your collaborations? What have been the challenges, and what have you done about them personally and organizationally? So we'll pass to Isotta, please.
Yeah. So what has worked well? Well, one thing that I wanted to add to what I said before is that we mentioned social isolation and how that is very specific to work with perpetrators of sexualized violence. For us, it's also worked well that the social isolation, which often comes with physical isolation, because many of these inmates are housed in protective custody, has helped us develop and implement a very targeted and specific and focused treatment program that involves both as aims the prevention of recidivism, but also the reduction of individual suffering, so protecting society and protecting the individual. In terms of our collaborations, if we think of internal collaborations, so with professionals who work with us, what has worked very well is having a multidisciplinary team with a range of expertise, implementing different activities within, I'm thinking specifically of the unit we have at Milan Bollate, but also in other prisons, which implements an intensive treatment program. So there are a range of different weekly activities that are put in place. So this multidisciplinarity has worked very well as this constant exchange and reflection among professionals themselves on a regular basis, sharing insights from the work, their personal experiences, their challenges, and so on. And this has been incredibly instrumental in terms of averting, or in case responding to, risks of countertransference, mental health risks, and so on. So we found that supervision, intervision, training, specific training have worked very, very well. At the same time, we've devoted a lot of time and energy to nurturing that relationship with gatekeepers. and also to that, to developing and sustaining that multi-agency approach. And obviously this doesn't come without challenges. There are a range of challenges which I think the keynote speaker explained quite well, very well actually earlier. But this has also proved very important in our work, including through raising awareness with correctional officers about the work that we were doing, particularly in protective custody, understanding what was going on there and understanding that there was no collusion with the inmates, that, you know, we weren't doing something that in ways it was very specific, but it wasn't against, you know, their day-to-day work. Something else that has worked very well for us in terms of inside the work with inmates themselves has been this gradual process of building the treatment alliance, which starts off with this psychodiagnostic assessment and anamnesis, and for this sharing of this moment, this joint reflection with inmates on their psychological and existential condition. We've found that exploring their narratives from the beginning together has helped a lot in then paving the way to building that alliance.
Fantastic, thank you. Davide, what has worked well in your collaborations? What have been the challenges and what have you done about them?
Yes, well, working in prison, as I said, is not an easy task today, because you have to address and keep in mind that this is a really, really multi-agency work. You have to talk, you have to work with different people, different associations, and different people doing different jobs. And so what me and Mario found is that when you work in prison, you have to continue to explain what you're doing, in the sense that, as Isotta just said, you have to continuously work with the staff working in prison, so that they understand what you're doing and why you're doing it. And but it's not an easy task, and it's also not a short-term goal that you have in prison. I mean, this discussion will take lots of time, and even though we're working, sometimes we still have problems with the basic organization of what we do in prison. For example, we're working with guards, and there is, in my experience, there are two worlds inside the prison. There is the staff and there's guards, and these two the worlds don't communicate easily, in my experience. And so sometimes you talk to the staff, you talk to the psychologists, you talk to the educators working inside the prison, and you reach some kind of agreement, and they say, well, then when you'll start your group, your project, then you go where the prisoners are, and you'll start it, and then you get there and the guards don't know anything of what you just which you just agreed upon, and so you have to start again. Sometimes you don't have the room, sometimes you don't have the chairs, sometimes you say you start a group at 3 o'clock, then you get there at 3 o'clock, but before 3:30 there's nobody there, because it takes a lot of time to get prisoners to the room. So obviously one of the challenges is that you need to be present, be there in prison. I mean, people have to, they have to see you there, and with quite some continuity. It is very important, and I see it. When they start to recognize you, people working there, then it's easier if you develop a relationship with people working. Sorry. Also, what worked for us is working with probation. Working with probation we found it quite easier in our experiences. So for people who are at the end of their sentences, and they're out, they're exiting prison, they're going out of jail, working with probation, so that what you started in in jail will continue outside. That is quite, we saw that it was quite easier. While working inside with the inside staff of the jail, it's a bit trickier. It needs a bit more work and it needs more dedication.
Thank you, Davide. Okay, we've covered a really wide range of topics here in these contributions to these first two questions. So I just wanted to offer the panelists the chance to make a comment on what's been said so far, to reflect on what's been said so far.
I want to congratulate Davide for the metaphor that he used by expressing the two worlds that coexist in a prison, those of inmates and those of the correctional officers. And he surprised very well the organization, the overall organization in such an institution. It is, yes, I want to highlight the importance of them to know more about the reintegration sector work. They are curious, and imagine that in Romania, the reintegration sector wasn't a separate department until, let's say, 2006, 2007. Until then, the epicenter of the prisons were the security department. So after we appeared, the psychologists, social workers, educators, the central role of the penal convictions was changed from keeping the inmate in custody to trying to change him at cognitive level, behavioral level, and somehow the correctional department enter in a sort of shadow. So through the director of the institution, which I see him as the catalyst and the person that could bond these two elements, the correctional and the reintegration sector, the top management can make the link to collaborate these sectors very well. Also, when I think about these two worlds, I cannot think about my multiple role that I have in this institution. I am also officer, but a psychologist too. So it's sometimes is a dissonance between wearing a uniform, imposing authority, and trying as well to be supportive, empathetic, and kind to the clients, but in the same time to set limits. It's a juggling between these roles.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Paolo or Isotta, would you like to come in on a kind of reflection on what we've said so far?
Well, I just thought what Davide said about being, sometimes even just being physically present and constantly present is so important. And, you know, sometimes it's just those moments, even, you know, when you're entering prison that you have with the guard there, or, you know, just greeting the people when you go in, being there every week. I think those are aspects that are crucial to legitimizing the work you're doing in prison, and sometimes, you know, are underestimated by many professionals because you just want to go in and do what you have to do and leave. But actually, even those moments are incredibly valuable and important.
Thank you, Isotta. Davide, would you like to come in?
Yes, well, as I was saying, and this is something I thought about after the COVID lockdown we had here in Italy, because before, and Mario, I think, agrees with this, before the COVID lockdown, we worked in prison with a project. Okay, so we don't have a foothold in the prison. Okay, we just work there we have various projects who are funded, but our time there is limited. So what was important for the inmates, I think, and for our work is that we were there. Let's say, I don't know, Thursday at 3 o'clock. Everybody knew that we were going to be there. We were going to do our group, and that created a sense of continuity and a sense of even belonging to a group. And so this is something that, for example, in jail is not very often seen by inmates, that somebody is there continuously. Some people, professionals, come and go very easily, and that, I think, is one aspect of our work that is very positive. And during the lockdown, our work was interrupted abruptly, and we couldn't obviously communicate with the inmates. And I think that was really a setback in our work, in the sense that we didn't have the chance to talk about it, to say goodbye. We didn't have a chance to get back to work, or to work even let's say, through the internet. That, I think, was really, really great setback. And for example, Mario, I know, started again working in Florence, but for example, I haven't started yet because the jail hasn't given me the okay pass, let's say, so we can't go back to do our work. That, I think, is a big setback, because one of the things that have worked in this project is that the fact that you were there. We struggled to be there no matter what, and with the COVID, that was the thing that we worked on very much, and that was taken from us with the COVID lockdown.
Thank you, Davide. So we've really been getting into the kind of dynamics here, not just between the practitioners and inmates, but between practitioners and wardens, between practitioners and other members of staff. And perhaps we can continue to explore this a little bit more in the Q&A. Thank you for your contributions. We have one more question that we're going to pose, and then we'll move into the questions from the audience. So the final question we'd like you to talk to is, what are our next steps? What could we do, or what could we have done better? So Laura, I'd like to go to you, please.
Well, therapy with sexual offenders is underrated because there are not enough evidences about the effectiveness of it. And I refer here to the situation in Romania. There are no valid indicators about how many of the perpetrators that followed the standardized intervention relapsed. The only key of control that we have is to check upon the new entered inmates to see if they have in their criminal background a conviction or more for sexual crimes, and to check also if in the former sentence they have followed structured intervention. But being asked about if I see my work as effective, and being asked by my person that know me, how many do you save today from the road to perdition? It's kind of it's a hard question to answer to this, and to find solutions to go on. Most of the people give credit to numbers, and if I say, oh, I saved one, or the rate of recidivism has decreased with 20%, this is a desirable answer. Okay, the numbers are very important, and I give credit to studies that are revealing effectiveness of interventions. But in order to get there to these outcomes, we must pay attention to the inputs that we offer to the overall mechanism. And here I refer to the well-prepared specialists, that they need to go to training courses, that they need to be supported by their superiors. And being now in a managerial position, I am more aware that the people in my subordination need to be validated for their efforts, need to be given positive feedbacks, because they need permanent reinforcement to go on with this hard work. So as I said before, I want to repeat it again, that we have to strengthen collaboration, firstly inside the prison with the correctional sector, but also with collaborators from the community. Unfortunately, there aren't many volunteers to come into prison to deal with sexual offenders, because it's quite a very difficult area to deal with. Our volunteers came especially for educational programs or more socially oriented. So we could try to expand our collaboration, maybe with universities, to find better ways to develop new interventions, more updated to the scientific realities. And it might be a solution to get more staff, because in our system we confront with a lack of staff. And as Davide said earlier, if I would be a therapist with a male therapist as well, the effectiveness of the therapy would be much more increased. So these are my ideas about for the future.
Thank you, Laura. Isotta, what are our next steps? What could we do or have done better?
So I think Laura's already brought up lots of great points, and hopefully I'll be able to build on them a little bit. Well, definitely something that we want to invest more time and energy in is debunking that prison subculture that I discussed earlier, that stigmatizes certain inmates in particular. And I mentioned that we've kind of managed to take advantage of protective custody to implement a very specific treatment program, but we've also faced challenges when not working specifically with sex offenders, but maybe with perpetrators of domestic violence who weren't held in protective custody because they were ashamed to participate in treatment groups. They feared reprisal at the hand of other inmates. So there's a lot of work to do in that sense to fight this prison subculture. There's a lot of awareness raising that we plan on doing, including with the general prison population, with other inmates, just to understand sort of the situation of sex offenders in prison. And we find that this is crucial because in a way it kind of reinforces that principle of legality. It breaks down that constructed hierarchy of offenses that often exists in prison. And so in that sense, it's beneficial to the prison system as a whole. In terms of what Laura was saying about impact and lack of data and so on, we definitely want to work a bit more on research and being able to collect and analyze data systematically. I mean, we have impact assessments as part of many projects. We have data, on recidivism that is often shared with us by the authorities. We are often able to monitor service users because once they exit prison, they very often continue to benefit from treatments that we offer in the community. But at the same time, it's very hard to have that kind of consistent longitudinal data that would be very helpful for us to understand the impact over time of our interventions, but also to make a case with the authorities, with politicians, with decision makers of the value of the work that is being done, because sometimes the numbers aren't that high. I mean, we welcome welcome about 30 inmates every year at our unit at Milan Bollate prison. There are other programs, of course, but we're not talking about 300 inmates a year, and sometimes there might be some skepticism around that. But actually, it's the value of the intervention. It's the intervention over time. It's the value it holds in terms of prevention for future violence, in terms of protection of victims and potential victims. So we'd like to work more on trying to contribute to this culture shift, even in the eyes of politicians and decision makers. We've made some steps in this direction in terms of research and data collection by setting up an organization called Contrasti that focuses specifically on clinical research, but we want to do much, much more. And we would also very much welcome the incorporation of treatment provisions in prison sentences. And so there's much more advocacy that we'd want to do in the future to kind of allow this.
Fantastic. Thank you, Isotta. Davide, what are our next steps? What could we be doing better? What could we have done better?
Well, in terms of steps, I mean, we've talked about this in Relive, which is the Italian network for perpetrator programs that I'm speaking on behalf of today. And the problems and the challenges we face were very well put by both Laura and Isotta. I would say too that there are little resources put in perpetrator programs in prison by the Italian state or by let's say private to fund projects, and also research. Yes, research is a very key point in this field, and we could do more, and we need to do more so that we can have longitudinal studies, like Isotta said, and we can see the effectiveness of these treatments we have in prison. Also, what I would say a challenge is for, say, broader approaches, cultural and political system we need to address, because, for example, in Italy there is a saying which goes, well, when you talk about sex offenders, there's a saying that goes, we should throw away the keys, referring to the keys of the cell. And Paolo wrote a book with this title, but it's a very, let's say, it defines what the cultural establishment is right now. It's starting to change, but we need to work in this direction, because this kind of work sometimes is not viewed as useful, and it's viewed with very distrust. And people need to understand that these perpetrators cannot be held in prison forever, and one day they will come out of prison, and if we don't work in the sense to if we don't work to prevent recidivism, these people are bound to do what they did again. So we need to work, I think, at even more cultural and political level, so that the importance of our work is recognized and understood.
Absolutely. Thank you, David. And that's, I think that kind of really encapsulates why we're all here today. I'm gonna move us into some questions from the audience. And once we've done those, I'll give you the chance for a kind of final comment. The first question we have is for Laura, and this is from Deirdre. And she says, was it your impression that the officer in your situation was reacting in a way that the perpetrator was not worthy of service due to the crime? Or did the officer sense your unease and decided to end things to protect you from trauma?
This is quite an interesting question. Thank you for the question. I've never thought about this approach of the situation, but yes, thinking about the whole frame of the situation. I don't want to construct now memories, but the officer expressed his repulse to after the inmate went away from the room, saying that he's not worthy to receive the intervention. I couldn't say that I was happy or validated in my inner thoughts, because it was a conflict. I am a psychologist. I must be empathetic to my clients no matter what, and not have a judgmental attitude towards them. So I remained silent, and I haven't had any reaction at that moment. But as I've told you, it was an episode that has raised into my mind many questions about how to deal from now on to these situations that can appear. So this is what it's in my mind right now. Unexpected questions, yes.
Thank you. Okay. I wondered if anyone else on the panel wanted to comment, because this kind of speaks to the question that we've been talking about around the kind of prison subculture, or the culture within staff, and the culture within staff and the culture within inmates around the hierarchy of offences. Maybe not, and we can move on to the next question. Okay. So I've got a question from Fianuala to Isotta. I was wondering if you can expand on the exploration of the existential. Is this grounded in beliefs or values framework, or what's the approach here?
So it's thank you for the question. It's very important, first of all, to continue what is the sense of the intensive unit of treatment, because this is for us the most important way to act in prison, in treatment with offenders, mostly with gender-based violence offending and sex offending. And this is, first of all, a sort of unit that give the continuity of the protective custody. This is, it was important to speak about the subculture, because it's very important that we took from this subculture the possibility to have a context where the people, where the prisoners are obliged to confront themselves with the professional every day. As Davide said, this continuity is very important. In this way, also, while it is vital that the prosecutor take responsibility for the crime committed, it is equally important to explore their personal narratives, which frequently involve experience of violence endured or witnessed at various stages of their lives, including during childhood or early adolescence. This part of the project is very important, and we work with them just to build a diagnostic alliance in group treatment, in which are the beliefs of these people, how the beliefs are developed during their childhood, and this is one of the part of the project. But all this sort of intervention in prison could be effective only if one part go after the other part, and there are continuity in a team, not in a professional, not only in one psychologist or criminologist working with those sort of offender, but in a team, in a build team, which take part in their work and take richness of their work about the recent strategy of treatment developed in the scientific and treatment project. We work a lot of our work is starting from the anamnesis, from the psychodiagnosis, from changing their experience of life with what's happening in their crime life, and this could explain how is work in a good way the treatment islands in such a section, in such a unit. Is this important for us? Every kind of crime, personal crime, which are typical of the gender-based violence, have to be analyzed in a protected context and have to be a continuity. This is very important. It's not important which operator you choose for. It's important in which context you are able to build in a prison, and so which alliance you can also build with the system of administration to build such a context.
Okay, I've got a question now for any of the panel members from Amanda, which says, could you speak a little bit about your experience of the proliferation and ease of access or normalization of pornography within prisons and the challenge this poses in working with men? Is this something that you are noticing in prisons, this increased access and proliferation? Are you using particular materials to address it? Davide.
Yes. Well, I personally am not experiencing proliferation, this rise in proliferation and ease to access violent pornography in prison. I'm experiencing it in outside the prison context. For example, we work with teenagers who have committed gender-based violence, and usually with teenagers, when you work with teenagers, I usually explore this part of pornography, and because with smartphones and internet access, you have very easy access to pornography, and being also a teenager and adolescent, sexuality is a topic you would obviously explore, and so I usually explore with teenagers this topic, and materials that I specifically use. Well, I've last year in the WWP's annual conference, we had some workshops on pornography and teenagers, so I'm using that material. But actually in prison, we haven't had the chance to, we didn't see this proliferation and ease of access. So I'm not dealing it directly in prison. Actually, I'm dealing with it outside prison. So just half of the question answered.
Sure. So yeah, I think, is it something that, because of it, the proliferation outside, is it something that you're noticing in the way that prisoners present when they come in?
Okay, well, no, actually, no. There's something, probably a topic that not having an internet access in prison and being these inmates, some of these inmates have been in prison for quite some time. Probably you don't, maybe it's something I have to think about and reflect upon, but you don't really tend to think about outside things in prison. So internet access is something I don't really, I haven't really thought about, but it's a very interesting input.
Okay, so Darren was talking this morning about the kind of relationship between work in prisons and work of NGOs outside, and kind of doing that link between work outside and work while people are incarcerated. We've got a question from Dave. Can anyone provide some information or speak to how work which begins in prison continues in the community, or your views on community provision thereafter? If you raise a hand, then I can call on you. Okay, Isotta.
Okay, so I'm just going to share some insights about how we try to continue work that we start in prison in the community, and then maybe if Paolo wants to add something, or if I forget some important aspects of it, he can chip in. Well, we think that work that begins in prison should definitely continue, if possible, in the community, and actually we try to facilitate that transition with circles of account and responsibility, which we have in place in various localities in Italy where we operate, to facilitate that transition from prison back in the community. So we have volunteers who, trained volunteers who meet with inmates. They begin meeting them at the end of their prison sentence, and then they continue meeting them regularly in the community. And at the same time, inmates who are released can access treatment programs that we offer at our local criminological center in Milan. And we find that this is essential because very often, although, you know, a program might be extremely beneficial to an inmate, it's an intensive program, it's a one-year program that can be repeated, then the work isn't exactly done. You know, there are issues that remain outstanding. It's ongoing work on the person, and so it's essential that it doesn't end once a person is released, if possible. Paolo, I don't know if you'd like to add something to that.
Yes, it's very important that we talk about, Davide, the point of the continuity of the treatment of the people treated in prison, that they feel that they have always the same operators working with them. It's the same things about what's happened after the prison. So we know that it's very important that the same team working in prison, which are team from external professional, is a team that continues to work with them outside from prison in some official center, for example, our local center, but also as a volunteer in the situation that we have created with this very important experience of restorative justice, the COSA, so the circle of sustainability and accountability that we have built in Milan. We have 15 COSA now members. 15 members which are guilty, working with 3 volunteers for every circle. And also this is very important, give the sensation to people that have a sort of disturb of the consciousness that there are someone that could take care for. They give an hope, for example, that also when you come out from a prison with such a stigma, you can realize that your life could be built again, and also your relationship could be better than that the people had before the crime and with the crime.
Thank you, Laura. Could you speak to this one? Are there ways in which the work begun in prison continues in the community in your context?
Well, we are at the beginning of establishing some collaboration with the external institutions through some interinstitutional procedures. We have results in continuing the intervention, especially for drug consumers. They have the chance to continue the intervention that began in prison, and also to continue it after the release with local agencies, of course with the consent of the ex-inmate. Then we can refer an inmate that participated at school in prison, and after that he can continue school outside. But these are limited examples, and we have to be aware that we are not doing the best we can in these situations. So for now, we are only limited at these examples I gave you.
Okay, thank you. And Davide, you touched on this. I wonder if you wanted to come in on this one as well.
Yes. Well, as Paolo said, continuity is very important. So in our case, we tend to, in cases where people have done a project or a group with us in prison, and then they finish their sentence and get out, we tend to, with the probation officer, we have an agreement, and in certain cases they continue their let's say their sentence outside, because they have the possibility, because their lawyers get a way to, let's say that law permits them to continue outside of prison, maybe in house arrest or certain similar things. And so we have an agreement in which some of these inmates can continue their with their treatment outside, because we have obviously our NGO is working also in prison, but also outside prison, and we have this, we have our perpetrator programs, and so we can help this transition, because, as Paolo said before, when people get out of prison, usually, sometimes there is social stigma, social isolation, and this is obviously a very key aspect to address, because it can lead to recidivism. So being able to be there to support the perpetrator and to provide a continuous approach with them, I think it's very important, and it works. It's a kind of, I think it's a very effective approach.
Thank you. And I guess this is something that really requires a high degree of coordination between the NGOs outside and the prison, I guess, for the consistency of the program, for passing on the information for that man coming out.
Yes, it is. But as I said before, in my experience, and I find it easier to collaborate with the probation office rather than the prison itself. I mean, prison itself is a closed system, a closed environment, and it's very difficult to interact with it. While with the probation office, it's quite easier. So we usually find that it's them that they're calling us saying, listen, this guy is coming out, and can we think of something together? Can we talk about him? And that's fairly easier.
I've got another question which perhaps you would all like to answer. So this is from Katerina on how do you use a gender perspective in your work, and another large area, how do you work with empathy? Could you give examples? Maybe Laura, if we just go back round.
Yes, I can refer to some practical exercises that we use in dealing with empathy. But I have to say that this is a complex process of building this notion of empathy, because we have inmates that don't even know how to name emotions, how to recognize them, and we have to take baby steps from these phases. So our maybe simple exercises with facial expressions through which they have to recognize the emotion, and after that we can pass through something more complicated, let's say like a role play. If someone from I don't know, a woman passes through a situation, and what would it be her answer to the experience, and they have to put themselves in their situation, or the exercise with the empty chair. I don't know, this is the exercises that I have in my mind now. And at the end, the letter to the victim would be the most the most in charge with emotion, but we must not forget that the sexual offenders have a lack of empathy for the victims, and most of it, it's in my research interest now to investigate the capacity of them to really attribute mental states and emotion to others. This is called the theory of mind concept. It's a capacity of the mind that started to develop at 6 years old, but studies revealed that sexual offenders have difficulties and deficits in this capacity of attributing to others mental states and emotions. So as I said, we have to go on with maybe childish exercises to build, as what I said, empathy. But this is how it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. So we're coming up to time, but we've got a few more questions that it would be nice to answer. Isotta, did you want to respond on this, how the gender perspective is brought in and/or how empathy is used?
Yeah, sure. I just wanted to mention that before I had a bit of a mix-up with the Italian name of the circles and the English definition. They're actually circles of support and accountability, in case I messed that up. But to answer the question on gender and empathy, I mean, Laura put it very nicely in terms of the challenges faced working particularly with perpetrators of sexualized violence. I mean, I think gender mainstreaming is essential in any program, in any perpetrator program, and that even boils down to, you know, the staff involved, the leadership roles, the ways in which you actually try to fight the gender inequality even in your day-to-day activities. We try to, we have a very strong female leadership in our team, and very often our interventions involve both a male and a female practitioner. And we find that this is very helpful and very useful in terms of even avoiding that kind of banter that sometimes can ensue. In terms, and obviously, you know, gender, as I hinted to earlier, I think when I was answering the first question, is just essential to the whole intervention, considering that we're working with perpetrators of gender-based violence. And so even exploring relationships, the role of gender in those relationships, power, gender norms, gender stereotypes, and so on, is kind of an integral part of the work. In terms of empathy, we have a specific group in prison that focuses and revolves around empathy. And one key activity that we normally do involves inviting a victim that is carefully selected. Of course, it's a person who may benefit from the experience because it might prove cathartic. It's not a victim of any of the inmates who are benefiting from the program. And normally the person comes in and tells a story and recounts the impact the crime has had on her life. And then obviously there's a discussion among inmates, and we find that this is a particularly pivotal moment in the treatment process. But obviously, that's empathy is always a big challenge with this particular target group.
Thank you. Okay, we've got one more question. Davide, did you want to say a few words on this question of the gender perspective and empathy?
Yes, well, I agree with what Isotta said just now, and obviously what she said about gender perspective is absolutely right. And we work mostly in the same way. We have, as I said before, we usually work in groups, and we have both a male and a female conductor of the group. So that helps with working on the gender perspective, and both in prison and outside prison. That's the, let's say, the standard we work with. So I wouldn't add more to that. Regarding empathy, obviously it's a very difficult challenge. It's even more difficult in prison. What we tried with a project we had a couple of years ago is trying to mix perspective taking with our work. So we had project in which we had both a group of one of our groups, and also at the same time we had a group participating in a theatre project. So they would they designed. There was a professional working with them who designed let's say a play based on these issues, and so they worked both in group and in the theatre with perspective taking and these. But I think it's quite useful. It's quite let's say different. It's a different approach, but I think it worked well.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I've got a question for all of the panelists, really. This is coming from Rory, who's interested in, and as I'm sure we are, how with domestic abuse inmates you provide support and information and safety planning for women on the outside. Is that something that you do? If so, how do you do that? So Laura, would you like to is that something that you do, or?
Not actually. Our intervention is centered upon the inmate, but during therapy sessions, it might come out informations, of course, about I don't know, plans for the inmate after he will get out and will go home, or maybe revenge plans, or I don't know, something related to his wife or partner, and we try to explore their plan after going out, and trying to change and dispute their distorted beliefs about how revenge can be useful. But when we have these informations and we see that the inmate is stuck in that phase of I don't know, getting revenge and being resentful, there were cases in which we maintained a collaboration with external agencies, and we announced them when was the release date for the inmate, and prevent I don't know, something the escalation of something much more serious. But as I say, we don't do many intervention only if this is a serious danger for after the release.
Okay, so we get quite a bad echo there. I'm gonna see if Isotta, is this something that you are doing, working with women on the outside to do safety planning?
Well, actually, we're very much in the same position as Laura. What we do is when we think it's particularly needed, we interact with victim support services. And so we would liaise with them on safety planning and the kind of information that might be useful on the outside. We normally tend to work primarily with inmates.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so quite similar, yeah.
Yeah.
Davide?
Yes, well, my answer is quite similar to both Isotta and Laura. It depends on the inmate, and it depends on the story, on his life story, and on the victim story. It depends on many aspects, I think. Sometimes it's I think it would be even I mean, if some people we work with have been in prison for 10 years and haven't had contact with, and are not bound to have any more contact with the victim, so bringing back the victim, sometimes I think it's in these cases, specific cases, might not even be useful. But obviously, as Laura and Isotta said, if, for example, there is an inmate that is going to come out and he's still in a relationship with the victim, and there is danger, we think there is danger, then obviously we will contact the victim. But I think it's, being in prison is, as I said before, it's quite a different context. So I think you have to manage every case in a specific way, and you have to see case by case.
Thank you. Okay, so final and quick question, hopefully, was we had a question on how these programs are funded. Do they come from yearly budgets from government, or are they grant funded? So yeah, prison programs with perpetrators, how are they funded? And be as brief as you can, please. So Laura, let's go to you first.
Yes, so we are a public institutions. Our funds are from the government, so quite simple. The funds aren't so many as we would have wanted, but there's a step further in the period that will come, because I hope that new psychologists will come to help us in our work. Imagine that we are 2-3 psychologists that we work with 450 inmates, an average of 450 inmates, and we have to deal with all types of problems and be prepared for all kinds of interventions. And this is not good, because no matter how much money you would have, if you are facing a lack of staff, you cannot provide the best intervention for them. So hopefully for better times.
Okay, Isotta, how are the programs funded?
So this is a tricky and painful question to answer, especially since we were talking a lot about continuity, and how can you have continuity if you don't have ongoing funding? So we're an NGO, and what we try to do is apply for grants, and that's how we basically give continuity to the program. And we've managed for the past 15 years, and grants, might be government grants, they might be grants from foundations. We're always trying to get creative about that. But that's a really big challenge for us. And we often find that, we might have some bits and pieces funded, but maybe not the whole program. And then that makes it even more difficult than to ensure that you keep it up and going. But this is a big challenge also in relation to what we discussed earlier in terms of making the case for this kind of work, and kind of having in mind how useful it is in the long term.
Absolutely, I'm sure that experience will resonate with a lot of members of the audience facing a similar challenge. Davide, how are the programs funded?
Well, me and Isotta are both in Italy, so the answer is the same. These are government grants that we try to apply for, and but obviously continuity is not always possible. So we try to apply for them every time we can, every time there is a possibility. With the as Isotta said, you need a special department just to work on the grants and on the projects, especially because it's quite tiring. And these grants only last for, in my experience, for just 1 year, more or less, or even less sometimes. So you have to be on the watch, on the lookout for new grants, new possibilities. So it's quite a job on its own, looking for grants and being able to sustain yourself continuously.
Absolutely. Okay, we've come up to time. I'd like to give a huge thank you to our panelists, and Isotta, please pass on that thank you to Paolo.
Yeah, sorry. He apologizes for his connection issues.
It's always the way. Thank you, Isotta. Thank you, Laura. Thank you, Davide.